Hi, it's Mark back with another tutorial, and today we're staying firmly put in Adobe Lightroom as opposed to splashing around in the fun waters of Photoshop. I'll be using this image primarily, and I'll put a link to this down below in the notes so you can go and get it if you want to follow along. And we're going to step through a number of the modules and panels to show how in Lightroom you can radically change the look of a picture, and in several different ways. Don't use Lightroom to edit an image once. The same tool sets can give you fundamentally different results, and it's worth playing with. So that's what we're going to do today. So we might have something dark and moody, we might look at different crops of a crop, and then possibly look at black and whites. And if you stick around to the end, I'm going to edit in extreme a picture which was really not very good that I took the other day. I know me not taking a good picture happens all the time. Anyway, I thought rather than throw it out, I'll see what we can do with an extreme edit, all in Lightroom. So I'll play the titles, you go and grab the picture from my website, link down below, and we'll meet up on the other side. Okay, so we're going to be looking at doing a basic edit on this, something a bit moody, something a bit black and white, playing with crops, drawing boxes, and two-tone, just to show the variety of things you can do. So to start off with a basic edit on this, I would usually not come in cold. I would click on auto because it can give you a good starting point, and indeed it has. Whenever I click on auto, I never look to see what the panel has actually done. I'm not interested in seeing what it has actually done. I look at the photo, so I'm not distracted, and that's quite nice. It's made a little bit more rich. There's obviously a little bit more contrast in there, and there's a little bit more definition coming into the sky together with that dust spot. When was this photo taken? Eye for information. This was from 2016, so that would have been on my own old D3300 Nikon camera, which never really did get a decent lens clean. So let's go and zap that, shall we? Just click on my spot tool there, and the spots are revealed by visualize spots down here, and the more intense you actually adjust things, the more you get to see. Okay, so there, you can clearly see it, and I'll just go bang, and it's gone. Okay, that's the housework done. Now, the first thing that annoys me about this picture is the horizon. I know you can only see a little bit, but it's not straight. So I would use the crop tool here, and either grab the edge and just twist it. So you see as my cursor comes outside, it becomes a double-headed arrow. Or indeed, the other way to do that is to go and use the angle. And you would just click, drag, and wherever you want your horizon to be. So I'm going to put there, and it straightens it. Incidentally, a lot of people tend to use angle for horizons. However, if we click on it again, you can actually click. I'm not going to do this because it'll undo what I've just done. You can actually click, drag down to put a vertical correct in one of your pictures. I don't think that did as good a job as I wanted it to, so I'm just going to try that again. There we go, that's better. And click OK. So what else would I actually do to this one? Well, I'd probably add a bit of sharpening, so I'll come down to detail and bump the sharpening up. Now, what sharpening does is it increases contrast at the border between lights and darks. So if we bump it up to maximum, and this is just for demonstration purposes, and we click on the mask and hold down our option key and move the mask over, where you see white is where it is trying to adjust the sharpening. So now you can see that by doing that to maximum, our sharpening is just all the way around the edges essentially. But I wouldn't want it that sharp. I'm going to roll it back a little bit. There you are. So I generally do add a lot of sharpening to some of my pictures, but I nearly always highly mask them to bring them down. I really just do want those little flicks and edges to be done. And zoom into the sky. Oops, go the other way. Control Command Plus. There's not really much noise in there, so I won't bother adding any noise reduction. Okay, the only thing I think I would do with this, as I say, it is just a basic edit, is I would probably put a graduated filter on, and I would drag that filter down just to cover the sky basically. Why has it gone blue? Because the last time I used a graduated filter I was obviously doing some blue hueing. It's a technical term, you know, blue hueing, and so that was left as blue. You can use these effects to add colours in as well, so I'm just going to click on the word effect, double click on it, it resets everything in there, and what I want to do is I just want to bring the exposure down a little bit more contrast in the sky, and possibly take some of the shadow out there. So I would consider that my first edit, just to get it looking a little more reasonable. G, to go back to our library. Now with that as our reference, I'm going to right click and create a virtual copy, and we'll actually continue editing onto the virtual copy. And this one we're going to look for something a little bit more moody. So D for develop, and to make it more moody, essentially I'm going to add a little bit of a vignette just to bring the edges in just a little bit, obviously not a lot. But this is something I always recommend as well. If you're never sure what a slider would do, always put it to its extremes, and it gives you a much better visual understanding as opposed to reading what a technical understanding is. So just bring that in a little bit, go back to basics, and drop the exposure of the whole picture a little bit. I'm going to go back to that graduated filter. I'm going to duplicate it, and I just move it to one side. Whenever I duplicate them, I move them. If I move it up and down, it will change the effect, but because this is a horizontal effect, I'm just moving it to one side. And the reason I'm moving it to one side is so I can have access to that other button should I come back in and want to edit it. When the buttons are stacked on top of each other, which they are when you just choose duplicate, you can't easily get to the ones further down the stack. And in this particular one, I'm going to put a bit more texture and clarity in to the sky. Okay, now then, we've darkened it quite a bit, but there is evidence of some lights coming in. You can see the highlights on the cone, so I'm just going to add a few pools of light here in the path. So to do that, I'll use my radial filter, and again that one is, for some reason, is also set to blue, so I'll just double click effect to reset it, and I'm going to put a radial filter in here. Again, just to get an idea of what we're doing here, I'll just bring the contrast up, the exposure up. Now as you can see, what's happening here is it's doing everything outside the circle, not inside the circle. So click on invert to bring it in. It's also, at one extreme, it's very feathered, and the other extreme, it's a disc. That just teaching ourselves exactly what the range of feathering is. So I'm going to put it about there, roll that exposure back a bit more, to about there, see what it looks like before and after. I think bring that back a little bit more. Now and reposition it there. Duplicate, move it up, but make it smaller to fit into the path. Smaller again, I think. And I'll do one more, duplicate, and drag that one up there. Just want to put a sense of a little bit of light in the middle there, going up. Come back down to this one, and I think we'll increase the brightness on that one, and switch off. So there you are, something a little bit more moody, but we've picked out a few areas where light is coming through, which is to help them drag your eye even further through. And that would be more of a moody type picture. So let us go back to our library, and I'm going to stick with the moody one and use that as a basis for the black and white one. So let's create another virtual copy here. I'm only creating virtual copies, so I'm keeping them distinct from one another should we want to go back and play with things during the course of the video. I haven't planned exactly what I'm doing here other than the basics of wanting to do moody, black and white, crop and so on, so we might go back and fiddle with some. So now I've got the virtual copy. Let's click on develop again and look to do a black and white. Well, there's a few ways of doing this. The black and white button gives you a good indication straight away, but I like to go down and have a look at the various black and white options that there are, and I'm liking number 3, 4, and I'm just running down, checking by eye what I think. I try to make a quick decision rather than land on them straight away. They either jump out at me or they don't, and this is for my edit's purposes, so I'm entitled to do that. So it's between 3 and 4. I think probably 4 has it, but I will roll it back a little bit. Actually, what does it look like in extreme? No, you see, I used to be decisive, but now I'm not so sure. I'm going for 3, and I'm going to roll that back a little bit and close. So there's a moodier look. Possibly want to... these are on extreme edits, by the way. I did mention that earlier. Sorry, I didn't want detail. I want effects, and I'm just going to bring that vignette in just a little bit more. And there's one way how we can get to black and white. So far, back to our library G, we've gone from a plain image to something more moody with some lighting effects on there, to something a bit more black and white. Oh, that hasn't come into focus yet. There we go. Slight delay, because when I'm recording, sometimes it just puts a little bit of a lag on things. And now to crop. So let's go back to our library view, and I'm going to use this one for the crop. So I'll right click and create a virtual copy of that one again. Put it on the end. D for develop. Now then, when we crop things, I like to generally I leave things, unless I'm looking for specific sizes for printing or whatever, I nearly always leave it unlocked so that I have got independent control over my horizontal and my vertical. Because of course, and I'll just demonstrate it anyway, if you had a particular size, it locks and everything adjusts to that aspect ratio. Control Z, Control Z. So I tend to like to do narrow landscapes. So I will often do a bit of an extreme, such as that. And that changes the look of this again. And with doing that, I would then probably want to duplicate that again and bring it over so I've got access to it and do something like that. Okay, let's do another crop. Let's go back to our image, and let's take virtual copy this one again. Create virtual copy, and D to develop. And this time I'm going to crop it unlocked. Fine. I'm going to crop it vertically, right down the middle, using a strict rule of thirds to have that path right in the middle and have that focal point there, right in there too. Something like that, which again changes the look and feel of this. I think, however, the vignette is a bit too much on that particular shot. There we go. So that makes it look different again. I know some of these things are obvious, but bear with me. Now let's do a different thing here. Let's take a virtual copy of this one. When it's thought about it, let's go and develop it. So D for develop. And this time we're going to make a very quick triptych on this. And how can we do that? Well, we can go up here and we choose a brush. And we got no feather. We want full density. The size to be quite small. And I'm going to go and hit the exposure right up there. I'm going to click once in the top corner. Move my cursor, my paintbrush to the other side, hold down my shift key and click again. Click again. And again. Oops. And again. And you can put a bit of a full border in there, but then you can also, I'm doing this by eye, click, hold my shift key and drag it down to get a vertical line, and then click, drag it down to get a vertical line. So there's a way you can start to introduce a border, and the difference in this is you kind of, and this is deliberate because I've used exposure there, you kind of see a little bit of a breakthrough. But if you wanted to actually try and get those really bright, you could start throwing more contrast and such at it, and even duplicate it. I'm not sure we're going to get much out of that, but yeah, there you go. It starts to get rid of it. Ordinarily, you could jump into Photoshop and actually do that. Okay, so there you are. We've drawn some boxes on there. So what next can we do to change the overall presentation of this? Let's go back and take another virtual copy of our black and white. Create virtual copy. When it finishes rendering the changes on the virtual copy. Incidentally, that just shows how Lightroom works. Lightroom doesn't commit changes to your picture. Lightroom keeps your picture and keeps a catalogue or a list of all the things that you've done to the picture, and it replays them on top of the picture. Your original raw file is not changed whatsoever. Clicked on it, press D for our develop module, and in this one we're actually going to do some colour toning. And to do that, we're going to jump down here into the colour grading, which was a more recently introduced module to Lightroom. Previously, I would jump over into Photoshop to do my colour grading. In fact, I've got a whole series of video tutorials on colour grading and colour matching and colour theory, which you'll find in my playlist here on YouTube. But for now, we're just going to stick with the basics. Your view might look like that, depending on where you left it, or indeed it might look like that. But what I tend to do is use them individually, one at a time, slightly larger on screen. The concept we're going to do here is we're going to put a colour into the shadows and a colour into the highlights. So on each of these you have a hue, which you can see this runs around the outside. Selecting our hue. And then once you have a hue, so let's just leave it on that one for the moment. Well, let's put it on one that will really stand out. Let's leave it on the green. You've then got saturation, which is how much of that colour you actually want in there. And then once you've got your saturation, you've got your luminance. And then you've got this option down the bottom, which is how you blend and balance between the shadows and highlights and such. We're not going to bother with that today. So firstly, let's just reset these. So in terms of this particular picture, I want to put a blues into the shadows, and I want to put a yellowish or a complementary colour to the blue into the highlights. So let's go around, get around towards the blues, bring the saturation up so a lot, so I can see exactly what colour we're looking at. Now I think I'll tend away from that, which is more cyan and steel type colour, and I think I'll bring it more towards the purple, so I'm somewhere there. And I want to darken it as well, so I'll bring the luminosity down, but I don't want it as rich, so I'll bring the saturation back. Now to complement that, if we just jump over the other side of the wheel here, you see you've got our yellows. So if we click on our highlights, bash that saturation all the way up, so we'll get a better on-screen visualization. And I'll just roll that around till I get it too green, till I get a nice yellowy orange coming in about there, I think. And I'll brighten it just a little bit, but I'm going to roll the saturation back. Okay, so that's just a simple 30-second probably job of doing a colour grade, add a complementary tones within the shadows and the highlights of this black and white image. So before we just had a black and white image, now we've introduced that two-tone. Of course, once you've done that, you might want to revisit some of your other edit settings, make them more extreme, or otherwise they will look slightly different because you've got different underlying colours, and how the colours and luminosities of play against each other are all impacted in the tones and the white balances and so on. And that's it. Right, I'm going to call it a day on the different styles that we've done on this one edit. I hope you found that useful. And now I'll go and get that St Mary's Lighthouse picture, which I was going to throw in the bin, and let's do an extreme edit on it to see if we can make something of it. So I'll be back in 2 ticks. So this is the said picture. If we zoom in a bit, you can see there's quite a bit of detail there, people walking back and forward. That's 100% from the land, which is on the right along the causeway to St Mary's. But as I say, I wasn't wholly enamoured by it, so I thought I would just try something in extreme. And so I thought, let's try a bit high key. So we'll stick a a graduated filter on the start. Just make sure everything's reset and drag that down to meet the horizon line, about there. And I'm going to use that to pop the exposure up quite a bit on the top. Possibly even a little bit more, bear with me. Okay, and then I'm going to do another one. I could do one grad across the whole picture, but I'm doing two in case I want to actually change them. This time I'm going to drag this one up from the bottom to roughly match where the other one was, and I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to increase the exposure on that. Okay, and then back to our basics panel. I'm going to bump the exposure a bit more, but also the contrast. Add the texture in, possibly a little bit of clarity as well. Desaturate this a little bit more. Everything is crammed up into this end of the spectrum. If I hold down my Option or Alt key and click on the whites, where you see white, it means there's no detail there at all. It's all blown out. So I'm just going to take that up a little bit further. I'm going to do the same with the blacks. Option or Alt and click on that. And where you see black means we're past our black point. There's no more detail there. And you can see I can take that all the way down. And it's we can't quite get that far. But I do like it down there. This bit here, let's just see what a huge spot removal can make of that, shall we? So let's just, I mean, normally you go to Photoshop for this, but let's just see if I can actually just do that. And go back and have a look. You wouldn't really tell, I don't think. So I'm going to go back to spot removal again. I'm going to switch off the visualization because it's not spots I'm after, and I'm just going to start and take out some of the bigger bits that I don't actually want there. I'll get rid of the bird that's up here and get rid of that bird. I'll leave that one in for now. And I'm going to go down to effects, and I'm going to do a net, as opposed to a dark vignette, I'm going to go the other way and just get those corners to brighten up. And then that swallowed the bird up anyway. There we are. Just a little bit, just to sweep it out the corners. Come back to basics. And bump that contrast up a little bit more. Get this darks a little bit darker again. I'm probably going to get a little bit of colour back in there. So let's go back to whichever graduate filter that was. It's probably that one, which it is. So while we're on that, go for brush, go for erase, make the brush quite small, feathered, flow right down, and just brush some of that out. Just keep some of that land. There you are. And come out of that. And then why not? Because I do like landscapes in extreme crops, and we did it in part one. I'm going to bring this down, bring this up, and I'm going to cut off some of those people so that lighthouse is on my thirds. All right, so that, I'm sure you would agree, is fundamentally different. I think it's a bit more of an interesting picture. I think it's better than where we started, and it got to play with some extreme things in Lightroom. Just goes to show you can actually do an awful lot in Lightroom. Whether you like this edit or you don't like this edit is irrelevant to a degree, because everything is subjective in the art world. But what is more important is that the tools and techniques are there not just to be subtle with, albeit that is good. You could argue the less you have to do to a picture, once you've taken it, the better composed and the better the lighting was, and the better it matches your vision of what that picture should have been in the first place. But you don't have to stick with that if you wanted to go to the other end of any spectrum. So if you like that, please click on subscribe and keep up to date with future videos as they come along. If you think it warrants a like button, stick a thumbs up on it. If it warrants a thumbs down, then that's fine, but tell me why. because that's the only way I'll learn. And I've run out of things to show you on this particular one. So look out, we'll probably do a full colour grading one in Lightroom as opposed to colour grading in Photoshop at some time in the future. And I'm going to say bye-bye. So, bye-bye.